In the meantime, just I do want to say thank you to everyone again for inviting us and being able to participate in this presentation. I'll go ahead and get started first with using the vaccine locator. It was a tool developed in partnership with the state and Immunize Nevada and some of our kind of our PR agency partners as well. And it is a very handy tool that can be used with any participants that may be coming in who have an interest in getting vaccinated but may not know where to go or what kind of resources they can find. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And before jumping into the presentation, we'll do a very quick kind of tutorial on how to use the vaccine locator. All right. Let's see here. Perfect. And Caitlin, do you know if is my screen visible, the nvcovidfighter.org website?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. All right, so very quickly, if you go to nvcovidfighter.org, this is if anyone has any questions as to how to create an appointment or looking at how people can get vaccinated. You'll notice this tool up here, Vaccine Locator. You can click on this and it will take you into this really awesome tool that has been created for the state of Nevada. So it doesn't really matter where it is that you are across the state. It allows for you to type in a zip code here. And then it also allows for you, if you're looking for a specific pharmacy that you may be interested in, you can select that and it'll show you all of those locations that are in that area. So let's, for example, use 89521. And let's say I'm looking for just a Rayleigh's location, or maybe a Walmart is more well known, a Walmart location. You can then hit search. And you will notice here the zip code, which is a Northern Nevada zip code in the Washoe County area. It will pull up all those Walmarts where a COVID-19 vaccine can be located. Now, I know that there is some difficulties in accessing a private pharmacy. People may assume that there's a cost related to the vaccine, or maybe I've had a bad experience with a specific pharmacy location. At this top menu up here, you can click Calendar. And from this calendar, you can either see all of the community clinics across the state, either listed as a list, or you can choose the grid menu, which shows you the calendar days in that calendar format. The only thing to keep an eye out on if you're assisting with someone finding a community clinic or a community-based organization that's providing vaccines is that you'll notice only one clinic is listed on each day. You'll have to click on this plus option to see all of the clinics that are being hosted across the state. And so it'll mention there if it's Las Vegas, if it's Reno, if it's rural Nevada, such as Fernley. You can click on that specific clinic and all of the information that you may need to get vaccinated there or to help a participant get vaccinated will be there. That includes a flyer. It may include a link as well if that's what is needed to create some sort of appointment. All right. That is the NV COVID Fighter, both calendar and vaccine locator. We can circle back at the end if there are more questions, but I do want to get to those questions that we had compiled from different staff. And it looks like Dr. Stacey McHale is here. Hi, Dr. McHale. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. I'm sitting in front of not my normal computer, so I apologize, but apologize for being a few minutes late. Happy to talk with all of you and help you understand how to encourage your pregnant patients and those that you're seeing in your offices to help them get vaccinated.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Stacey McHale. Let me go ahead and share my screen with the presentation. We can kind of have a conversation and go over the most frequently asked questions that we compiled from WIC staff that they've been encountering when they're talking with their participants and patients about the COVID-19 vaccine. Let me start this here. Perfect. And again, thank you, Dr. Stacey McHale, for joining us. First is just covering some of the very general info about the COVID-19 vaccines. You know, we hear a lot of the vaccine was developed too quickly, the vaccine was rushed. And so what are kind of your go-tos when addressing that type of question? It was rushed. And that follow-up question is just, what is an emergency use authorization? And then also, what is FDA approved? We can circle back to that one, but first is going with kind of that rush comment.
All right, so and understandably, there are concerns about vaccine safety, and those are things that all patients are concerned about, especially those who are pregnant. Really, the vaccine is not necessarily a new vaccine. mRNA vaccines have been around and in production for almost a decade. Moderna, one of the companies that makes the mRNA vaccine for COVID, actually has tested other vaccines, and they had the technology in place before COVID was in existence. There were other mRNA vaccines that had been used for the SARS virus and the MERS virus from back in the last 10 years. And there was actually an mRNA vaccine that was developed for Ebola. So when the COVID virus became a pandemic, Moderna shifted gears and they took the vaccines that they already knew how to make and transformed them into the vaccines that we see for COVID. So yes, the vaccines were made quickly, but the technology was not new. mRNA vaccines, before they were released under the FDA's emergency use authorization, were rigorously tested. The Pfizer study involved over 25,000 people, and the Moderna study involved 30,000 people. Both of those studies were given placebo-controlled trials. And that means that they took half the people enrolled in each of the studies and gave them a shot of saline. And they took the other half of the people enrolled in the studies and gave them the doses of the vaccine. And they looked for differences between those two groups. This is how most medical research is done. And before the emergency use authorization was granted for either of these vaccines, both of them had been subjected to a very rigorous trial. I can speak to that personally. I was actually part of the trial for Moderna. So I received the placebo vaccine or the placebo shot as part of that trial, and then subsequently received the actual vaccine later once the emergency use authorization was approved. So emergency use authorization is something that's given by the FDA for a product that would have great benefit for the public, but that the strict standards that the FDA holds have not been 100% fulfilled, but they see that the benefit of the product outweighs the risk. So for the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, and I'll speak largely to those two because those are the two that are usually recommended for women during pregnancy, the emergency use authorization came after their phase 3 trial data was released. That means that they had tested the vaccine on multiple thousands of people and had shown that it was safe, and that the FDA took that safety data and realized that this was a benefit to the public. The other thing to realize is that with the emergency use authorization, that's not an inhibition to FDA approval. Since the 1 year mark or almost 1 year mark has been reached, the Pfizer vaccine has actually received full FDA approval, and the Moderna vaccine is up for full FDA approval prior to the end of the year. That means that the FDA has felt that the rigorous amount of testing that's gone into these vaccines shows that they are safe and beneficial for the public.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that answer. And thank you for, also participating in those trials. That's really amazing to know. So thank you. A question that is also heard a lot is, will the vaccine cause blood clots? I think there was a lot of this ties specifically to the Janssen or the J&J vaccine. Just if you could elaborate just a little bit, what are the possible risk of blood clots? Is it something that people should be worried about, and maybe how to best address it when people choose that as a reason to not get vaccinated?
Absolutely. So there were some reports of adverse events with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is a different type of vaccine than the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine actually is not an mRNA vaccine. It is a more traditional vaccine that uses an adenovirus, which is a non-infectious virus, as a vector to put the COVID virus information into your body. We're not exactly sure why there was an increased risk of blood clots, but there were some pretty serious blood clots that happened, particularly in younger women and women of childbearing age. The vaccine from Johnson & Johnson was actually held on the market for a brief period of time, and then re-released once further investigation was done. Most obstetricians have not recommended the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for their pregnant patients because of that increased risk of blood clot formation, and also because there is an increased risk of blood clot formation just due to pregnancy. So the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines have been the ones that have been recommended. Yes, there is a concern with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, particularly in women of childbearing age, but that can be avoided by choosing one of the other vaccines.
Perfect, thank you. And then just the last of the general questions is, if you can just explain briefly what are breakthrough cases. I feel like a lot of the conversations that we are hearing then are, if people are getting vaccinated and then getting sick, does that mean the vaccine doesn't work? What does that risk look like?
So what I tell my patients in my practice is that getting the vaccine is not a force field or a magic bubble around you. It doesn't mean that you can't get exposed to COVID-19, and it doesn't mean that you can't get sick from it. What the vaccine does, though, is it trains your immune system to be able to fight off the infection. So getting the COVID-19 vaccine during pregnancy or otherwise means that if you're exposed to the COVID-19 virus from someone, your immune system knows what to do. It's going to go to work and it's going to fight off that infection, and it's going to keep you from getting really sick. It's going to keep you out of the hospital. It's especially going to keep you out of the ICU, and it's going to keep you from dying. 97% of the patients that are in the hospital right now are not fully vaccinated against COVID-19. The COVID-19 patients, again, 97% of them in the hospital are not fully vaccinated. That means that patients who are fully vaccinated, even though they might get a mild infection or maybe even a somewhat serious infection, aren't needing to go to the hospital, and they're not needing to go to the ICU, and they're not needing to be on ventilators by and large. All of that is very promising. So you have to know that you have to understand how vaccines work in general. And how they work is that your body learns to recognize something to fight off. The mRNA vaccines don't contain any virus. They contain a small portion of a protein sequence from the virus. So you can't actually get sick from the vaccine itself. The protein that is injected into the body is a protein that your body then copies. That's what mRNA stands for. It stands for messenger RNA. That protein is a messenger that your body learns to copy. And then your immune system learns to recognize that as something to fight off. Once it learns that, your body is able to fight off that infection. All vaccines work the same way in that same regard, but your immune system is responsible for taking care of the fighting off of the infection with any sort of exposure.
David, I think you're muted.
Oh my goodness, sorry, excuse me, thank you. So moving right along to the COVID-19 vaccine and misinformation. We have heard that the vaccine may possibly make people sterile, preventing girls and women from getting pregnant in the future. Is this true? Is this even possible? And how can that be addressed?
So there is absolutely no evidence that shows that vaccination with one of the COVID-19 vaccines causes sterility or makes it more difficult for people to get pregnant. There is a strong immune response to the vaccine, and there has been some information that's come out that shows that some women do have changes with their menstrual cycle because of that strong immune response for the first 1 to 2 months after getting the vaccine. Some women have skipped periods, and that has obviously led to concern for possible impacts on future fertility, but there has not been anything that's been shown to cause an impact on fertility. And in fact, most fertility physicians as well as OBGYNs are recommending for all women of childbearing age that they go ahead and receive the vaccination regardless of intent to become pregnant in the future. There's also important to know that the mRNA vaccines, the protein that's injected from the vaccine, does not have any dangerous preservatives that could impact fertility. And the mRNA that's in the vaccine actually degrades in the body within 3 to 4 days. So those proteins disappear. It's not like they stick around. And that's also important to know because that means that they should not cause any sort of harm to the person receiving the vaccination because they're disappeared from the circulation very quickly.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, moving right along to COVID-19 vaccine in pregnant, breastfeeding, and chest feeding individuals. Is the vaccine safe for pregnant people to receive? And I think that we can all maybe assume yes. What are the benefits for being able to get vaccinated while pregnant?
So I'll start off a little bit with the vaccine safety during pregnancy and breast and chest feeding. Women and persons who receive the COVID-19 vaccine during pregnancy do not risk passing any of the vaccine products to their unborn child. The COVID-19 vaccine itself has been shown not to pass through the placenta. COVID-19 virus only passes through the placenta about 5% of the time during an infection during pregnancy. However, it can cause many other harmful effects. The vaccine itself has been studied, and the placentas for women who have received the vaccination have been studied to show that the vaccine products themselves do not pass through the placenta, so the vaccine itself does not pass through to the baby. There are some great benefits, though, from the vaccine during pregnancy. Women who receive the vaccination, once they're fully vaccinated, start to produce antibodies, and those antibodies are actually passed through the placenta to the unborn child. So receiving the vaccine in pregnancy is almost a 2-for-1. The person who receives the vaccine is immune to COVID-19 after they're fully vaccinated, meaning that they won't become very ill if they do get exposed. But after delivery, the baby is also protected against COVID-19 infection by virtue of what's called passive immunity, passage of those antibodies through the placenta. All vaccines work like this, and that's why OBGYNs recommend that women get the whooping cough vaccination and the flu vaccine during pregnancy. It helps to protect their unborn child after delivery. Those benefits persist during breast and chest feeding, and all persons who are vaccinated during pregnancy continue to pass antibodies through breast milk. I know there's probably concern about getting the vaccine during breastfeeding as well. There have been studies done on breast milk samples from patients who were vaccinated while breastfeeding. And those studies were actually done out of Stanford and Harvard. So you can pick your coast as to which one you like to follow. The studies show that there's no evidence of any of the mRNA from the vaccine passing into breast milk samples taken as soon as 1 hour after the vaccine was given, up to 2 weeks after the vaccine was given. So mothers can rest assured that there's not a vaccine product that would pass through the breast milk to their children during breast or chest feeding. By the same virtue as pregnancy, the antibodies that are produced once a person is fully vaccinated are still passed through the breast milk throughout breastfeeding to protect the child who is breast or chest feeding.
Perfect, thank you. I am going to just combine some of these questions here, but when someone who is pregnant, if they choose to get vaccinated, are there any kind of adverse reactions that they can experience? Or I know that there are some normal, the sore arm or possibly a little bit of redness or soreness at the injection sites. Are there any adverse reactions that maybe pregnant people will experience that are completely normal, but just different from the general population?
So typically pregnant women are not going to experience any sort of side effects that are different than those of patients in the general population. The side effects that women experience during pregnancy, honestly, for most, at least in my personal experience, have been more mild. The immune system functions slightly different during pregnancy, and it's thought that the slightly decreased immune response may actually decrease the risk of side effects. Most patients will experience a sore arm or a sore shoulder. Some will experience a rash around the vaccination site. A low-grade fever is not uncommon, but that can be combated with Tylenol, which is safe to take during pregnancy. As a reminder, no one should be taking anti-inflammatory medications like naproxen or ibuprofen or aspirin during pregnancy unless directed to do so by their doctor. But the side effects are generally fairly mild, and the vaccine is very well tolerated by those who are pregnant. And addressing one other question that's here on the slide, the vaccine actually received the full FDA approval and the FDA and CDC recommendation for being given during pregnancy, regardless of trimester, because the data showed that there was no increased risk of miscarriage for women who received the vaccine in the first trimester versus those who did not. So please rest assured there is no increased risk of miscarriage receiving the vaccination in the first trimester, whether intentionally or unintentionally.
Perfect. Thank you so much for catching that question, and that's really good. information. Moving right along now to some questions that have been received about young children. I know that this is all still kind of up in the air, but from your expertise is when will children under age 12 be able to receive the vaccine? And kind of, does that testing and safety process look different than what was already done for the general population?
Perfect. David, if you want to move forward to the next slide to have that up for everyone.
Yes.
The vaccine for children under age 12 will likely be able to be given in the next few months. The expectation is likely for November that this will be approved, although this is not anything that is written in stone. There have been trials, particularly of the Pfizer vaccine, that have gone on for children ages 5 to 11. And it's expected that the Pfizer vaccine will be recommended for children in those age groups prior to the end of the year. The Moderna vaccine is also undergoing the same trials, and the expectation is also there that that approval will be in place. There'll be a lot of effort, I'm certain, with pediatricians' offices in terms of being able to get vaccines on board for children in that age group once the FDA releases the vaccines for that use. In terms of possible side effects, really there's one concerning side effect that has been noted for the teenagers and young and preteens in the vaccines that have been given so far. There is a little bit of an increased risk of inflammation around the heart muscle called myocarditis or pericarditis that has been noted in children who have received the mRNA vaccines. This is slightly increased over the general population, but the risk is still very low, less than 1 in 1,000 as a risk for having this sort of side effect. I'm sorry, I can't speak to the exact number here, but it is a very low risk, although it has been reported. So it would be important to watch out for signs of difficulty breathing or high fever, chest pain in children who received the vaccination moving forward. And I believe we'll probably hear more as the vaccines are released for those younger age groups as to specific signs to watch out for those populations.
Perfect, thank you. And I think just that last question here that we have for those young children is it possible for there to be any negative long-term effects? I know that we hear, well, I don't want to get vaccinated now. What's going to happen 10, 15 years from now? Is that even a possibility of something happening or becoming activated, if you will, that far down?
I would seriously doubt that there's going to be any long-term effect other than what we've been seeing. Most vaccine adverse events happen in the first 1 to 2 weeks after receiving a vaccination, and long-term effects from a vaccine have not been something that have panned out for most of the other vaccines that we have in our arsenal. The vaccine specifically for COVID-19, I would not expect to have any long-term effects just because it is a preservative-free vaccine and the vaccine products themselves disappear so quickly in the circulation. That remains to be seen. Obviously, COVID is a new disease. Vaccines for COVID are new because we've only been fighting this disease for about 2 years. This is something that's still going to need lots of research, but you have to outweigh the benefits versus the risks. The benefit of the vaccine is that if you are exposed to COVID-19, you're not going to need to be in the hospital. You're not going to need to be in an ICU. You're not going to be in a ventilator. You're not going to die. That's the bottom line. COVID-19 infection in women who are pregnant, for example, is 7 times more deadly than in women who are not pregnant. Women who are unvaccinated are the people that are having hospitalizations and intubations and potentially death. That's happening not just here in Las Vegas, but around the country. And it's really a very serious thing to make sure that all women understand is that if you get a COVID-19 infection during pregnancy, you have an increased risk of death. They've shown the maternal mortality rate for women who are not vaccinated against COVID-19 is 22 times higher than those who are vaccinated. That's entirely due to COVID. That's a 2,200% increase in dying during pregnancy if you don't get the COVID vaccine. This is not a scare tactic. This is research. And this is what's being shown at this point. Women have to trust the science behind the vaccine to know that they're making the best choice for themselves and for their unborn child. And that this is an important decision that you make as a mother. receiving this vaccine, deciding if your children are going to receive the vaccine. These are important decisions because you want to do your best to protect your family. The COVID-19 vaccines are safe and they give you that opportunity to protect your family.
Thank you so much, Dr. McHale. That's a startling statistic, but really good to know, I think, to pass that information along. Now we're just going to be taking, I believe, a few questions from the audience. Those were the most kind of common FAQs that we had collected. And one that we have is, if Moderna has been studied longer, how come it's taking longer for FDA to approve it if, compared to Pfizer, or if Pfizer has already been approved?
So I'm sorry if that was a little confusing when I spoke earlier. So the company, Moderna, has been making mRNA vaccines for other viruses for a long period of time. They actually started making the COVID-19 vaccine and prepared it for trial about 2 to 3 weeks behind the Pfizer vaccine. So the Pfizer vaccine actually completed its studies faster than Moderna did. And so that's why the Pfizer vaccine was the first one that was approved. Moderna's studies were completed shortly thereafter, and the Moderna vaccine then received the emergency use authorization shortly after Pfizer. So it stands to reason then that the Pfizer vaccine would receive the full authorization from the FDA slightly sooner than Moderna, but we would expect that to be coming sometime in the next 1 to 2 months.
Perfect. Good to know. All right, a second question we have here very quickly is just, what about people who have had COVID in the past and they get some sort of a blood transfusion? Are there any benefits that come from that? Is there, anything along those lines?
So for people that had COVID in the past, I'm assuming we're talking about the convalescent plasma. I'm not certain if that's where the intent of this question is going. Convalescent plasma does not necessarily provide long-term immunity to COVID. That's receiving a transfusion of plasma from someone that had a COVID infection in order to help you fight a COVID infection more readily. That's actually fallen out of favor because we have some other treatments that are much better, including the use of monoclonal antibodies, which is able to be used in women who are pregnant and breastfeeding, as well as those who are not. One thing that is important to mention is that COVID vaccination is recommended for all people, regardless of prior COVID infection. And it's actually recommended as soon as the person feels well enough to be able to receive the vaccine. People who have been infected with COVID-19 still have a marked improvement in immune response for future infection if they receive the vaccine after infection versus those who just try to rely on natural immunity.
That is good to know. I believe those are all the questions that we have right now from the audience. I am just putting that information again up for nvcovidfighter.org in terms of finding that vaccine locator tool and the vaccine clinic calendar. I'm also putting contact information there for myself, David Perez. If any other questions come up, please feel free to email myself, and I can forward them along to Dr. McHale and get some really solid answers for those questions that you may have. I just want to take this time to thank you, Dr. McHale, for joining us and being able to answer all of those FAQs that some staff had brought up. We're going to be using this info to create a one-pager. I know it was a lot of information to take in, and so that way it can be easily referenced by participants and staff members as well. But aside from that, I'll go ahead and hand it back to Caitlin, and I'll stop sharing my screen here.
Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We appreciate it. This has been recorded. We will go ahead and post it to Canvas for those who, one, weren't able to join in if you guys want to go back and reference it. I will also be sending out an email with the Locator tool. And like David said, if you have any other questions, you can email him or me, and we will ask Dr. McHale. So thank you again, everybody, for joining, and have a great rest of your afternoon.